A boy who left his village with nothing, only to return years later with a shiny car and a fortune. But what he hid behind that wealth would break his mother's heart. Before we dive into this story, we want to know, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Drop your country and your time in the comments below. The day Obiechina drove into Umugba with that shining black car, the entire village paused, not because of the engine sound, but because nobody expected the boy who left with nothing to return with something that made people whisper like they were hiding words in their palms. His mother Nneka rushed out from her compound the moment she heard neighbors calling her name, her wrapper barely tied well as she hurried, her heart beating fast from a mix of excitement and fear. She had prayed day and night for her only surviving child, and now he was home, back from the city where she feared trouble followed boys who wanted quick wealth. Obiechina stepped out of the car slowly, not smiling, not rushing, just standing there with that strange calm that made people look twice. He had grown bigger, his shoulders broader, his face older, his eyes sharper, but there was something about those eyes that made Nneka's heart flutter in a way that wasn't joy. She hugged him all the same, pressing her cheek to his chest, inhaling the scent of new clothes and a perfume she had never smelled before. Neighbors watched with wide eyes, whispering among themselves even though they tried to pretend they were not. Nneka held his face in her hands, asking the questions every mother asks when a child returns after a long time. My son, what have you been eating? Who have you been staying with? You didn't write, you didn't call, you kept me worried like a hen that lost her chick during heavy rain. But instead of answering, Obiechina looked away for a brief moment, just one small moment, yet long enough for Nneka to feel a sting in her chest. Something wasn't right, something wasn't sitting well inside him. The women of Umugba were already forming groups around the compound, each pretending to fetch water or adjust their wrappers, yet every single one had her eyes fixed on the big car like it was speaking its own story. Some whispered that Obiechina must have found one rich uncle in the city. Some whispered that he had joined a powerful business people only heard about at night. Some said maybe he was lucky, maybe the city favored him the way it rarely favored boys from small villages. Obiechina noticed all the stares, yet he kept that calm look on his face as he brought out 2 traveling bags from the car. But Nneka noticed something else, the way his hand trembled when he lifted the second bag, the way he scanned the compound like someone expecting trouble, the way his jaw tightened each time someone shouted his name with excitement. She didn't say anything though, she only picked one of the bags and led him into the house like she used to do when he was little, her heart dancing between joy and confusion. Inside the house, things felt different. Obiechina looked around like he wasn't sure where to start from. Nneka tried to make him feel at home again, asking whether he wanted food, water, palm wine, anything at all, but he only asked for quiet, his voice deeper than she remembered, his tone softer yet carrying something heavy under it, something he wasn't ready to open up about. But mothers always know when a child is carrying a load that doesn't fit inside the chest, so Nneka gently pressed him, not with questions, but with her stare, the stare that says I know you can't hide from me. Obiechina avoided her eyes, rubbing his hands together slowly, breathing in and out like someone trying to keep something buried deep inside. Later that evening, more villagers came to greet him. Among them was Okadaki, the tall man who always liked to brag about everyone's success so he could claim he predicted it long ago. He hit Obiechina on the back with so much excitement that the young man almost lost balance. My boy, I knew you would make it. I told all of them. I said this boy will return with something big. I didn't know it would be this big. Look at this car, only big men drive this type. Obiechina forced a small smile, but Nneka saw his fingers tighten again. She saw the way he stood still like a tree in strong wind, not bending, not moving, just bracing himself. She felt a strange cold spread inside her chest, but she tried to push it aside because her son was home and she wanted to enjoy that moment before reality started asking its own questions. Night came quietly, the sky clear, the air heavy with distant frog croaks and the soft hum of insects. Nneka lit a small lamp inside the room, giving everything a warm glow. She called Obiechina to sit near her, wanting just a simple conversation, nothing deep, nothing heavy, just mother and son after long years apart. But once again, he avoided her eyes, eyes that had carried him from birth to manhood, eyes that expected honesty from him. My son, Nneka finally said, let me ask you just one question this night, only one, and I won't ask more. "Where did you get that car from?" The question was simple, yet it cut through the room like a hidden blade. Obiechina's shoulders stiffened, his breathing changed a little, not much, but enough for Nneka to notice. He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again, then opened it once more, yet no sound came out. Instead, he looked down at his hands, those hands that trembled earlier, hands that now tightened into fists as if they were holding something too heavy to keep carrying. Nneka reached for him, but he stepped back slightly, the movement small but loud in meaning. She froze, stunned, as fear slowly crawled up her spine. Obiechina finally whispered something, the words escaping his lips like they were afraid of being heard by the night. "Mama, I will tell you everything. But not today, please give me time." Nneka swallowed hard, trying not to panic. She nodded slowly even though her heart was breaking in a silent way, the kind of break only mothers understand. Outside, the big car sat under the moonlight, looking too new, too shiny, too loud for a quiet village, and as the villagers slowly returned to their homes, some with excitement, some with suspicion, one thing became clear: the story behind Obiechina's sudden wealth was far from ordinary, and whatever truth he was hiding had already started shaking the peace in Nneka's heart. And as the night deepened, Obiechina sat alone on the wooden chair outside the house, staring at the car without blinking, his eyes carrying a fear that no one else saw, fear that followed him all the way from the city, fear that refused to leave even though he was now home. Something heavy was coming, and the village had no idea what door it was about to open. Obiechina sat outside long after the village had gone quiet, the moon spilling silver over his shiny car, his eyes tracing the contours of the roof, the wheels, the mirrors, as though the details themselves could tell him a story he was too afraid to hear. Inside, Nneka moved slowly, sweeping the room, rearranging small things, her mind spinning with questions she didn't dare voice aloud. She had seen her son leave years ago, thin, shy, with dreams that felt bigger than the earth itself. Now he had returned as if he had swallowed the city, yet there was a hollow weight behind the glow, a shadow she could feel pressing against her chest. Obiechina finally stood and walked to the car, touching the hood as if it were made of ice. He remembered the first day he had set foot in Lagos, the city that promised everything, and demanded more than a man could imagine. The nights he had walked alone on streets lit by flickering neon, the corners where danger hid like it had teeth, and the men who smiled too wide, offering opportunities that smelled of trouble. That car, that wealth, it hadn't been earned through steady hands or honest sweat alone. It was soaked with fear and decisions he had wished he could undo. Every time he thought of telling his mother, the words stuck like thorns, piercing him from the inside out. How could he speak of the darkness that came with the shine? Meanwhile, Nneka sat at the table, pretending to fold clothes, yet her eyes kept drifting toward the window where the car gleamed. She remembered the boy who used to run barefoot through the village, the boy who had climbed mango trees faster than anyone else, the boy who had shared his last morsel with the village children. Could that boy and the man outside really be the same? She wanted to believe he had just worked hard, that the city had been kind to him, but something in his silence gnawed at her. Mothers have a sense for these things, they see what the world tries to hide. And she could see fear in him, fear that carried a story she was not yet ready to hear. The next morning, the village stirred with its usual rhythm. Children ran past the compound, shouting, mothers called to one another, and vendors pushed their carts along the dirt roads. But the whispers about Obiechina's return had not died, they had grown. Some said he must have struck gold, others hinted at secrets no one should speak of. Nneka moved through the crowd with a careful smile, pretending everything was normal, yet inside, her chest tightened with unease. She watched her son from the window as he sat in the shade, staring at the horizon, and wondered what invisible chains he was dragging behind him. Obiechina spent that day walking through the village almost like a stranger, nodding politely, shaking hands, yet keeping his distance. The villagers had brought gifts, food wrapped in leaves, baskets of yams, palm oil, and groundnuts, but he declined everything, murmuring simple thanks. He wanted normalcy, but normal had abandoned him years ago, leaving only a trail of decisions that refused to be hidden. He passed old friends who had not expected him to return, their faces lighting up, their eyes wide with hope and curiosity. They asked about the city, the work, the car, but he offered only vague smiles, avoiding details. Every lie, every omission, was a small scar forming in the delicate space between him and his mother. By evening, he finally agreed to sit with Nneka under the mango tree near their house, the one that had stood through storms and seasons, the one that had shaded him when he was just a boy. Nneka brought a calabash of water, and they sat in silence, listening to the wind rustle through leaves, to distant roosters crowing, to the soft hum of the village settling for the night. The silence stretched, heavy but necessary, because both mother and son were holding on to fragile fragments of what used to be. Nneka finally broke it gently, asking, "My son, tell me one story, one happy memory from the city." Obiechina exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. He spoke of the first day he found shelter, the kindness of strangers who gave him work, the nights he had slept under open skies wondering if he would survive. Every word was careful, every pause deliberate, because he could not let the truth spill yet. The truth was a storm waiting to strike. Later that night, when Nneka had gone to bed, Obiechina returned to the car. He ran his hand across the leather seats, the dashboard, the steering wheel, the smell of the city lingering like a phantom. He had made promises he could not keep, choices that had offered wealth at the cost of innocence. Every time he looked at the car, he saw what he had done to reach this point, and his heart ached. He thought of his mother, of her prayers, of her dreams for him, and he knew the moment he told her the full story, her heart would fracture. The idea of seeing her hurt, of watching the light leave her eyes, haunted him more than the fear of the city ever had. Obiechina slept little that night, his mind replaying each decision, each moment he had wished to undo. The village around him slept unaware of the invisible storm circling the house. Nneka, in the other room, turned in her sleep, dreaming of her boy running through the fields, of laughter and light, not of the wealth that carried shadows. Morning would come soon, and with it, new questions, new whispers, new hopes from villagers who believed in fairy tales where none existed. Obiechina knew he could not delay forever, yet he could not speak either. The silence had become both a shield and a prison, and he was trapped between the two. When the first sounds of the village arose, children laughing and selling their small goods, Obiechina stepped outside again. He walked past the curious eyes of neighbors peeking through fences, past old friends calling his name, and reached the edge of the compound where the small stream cut through the land. He looked at the reflection of the car, the reflection of himself, and for the first time, he wondered if the boy who had left the village had truly died, or if he had survived by becoming someone unrecognizable. The thought made him shiver, because he realized that the price of survival had been more than he could ever have imagined, and soon, Nneka would need to know whether he wanted it or not. By midday, he could no longer ignore the whispers that had begun to swirl even inside the house. Nneka had invited a few women in, bringing them tea and palm wine, but all they could talk about was the car, the city, the wealth, and Obiechina's sudden transformation. The women's voices were sharp with curiosity, their laughter too forced, their eyes flickering toward the door every few seconds as if waiting for him to speak. He kept himself occupied, moving quietly, yet every joke, every question, every exclamation felt like a knife pressing against his ribs. They meant no harm, but they didn't know the weight he carried, the choices he had made, the secrets buried inside his chest. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, painting the village in muted gold, Obiechina finally found himself alone on the veranda. The air was warm, heavy with the smell of wet earth and fresh leaves. He closed his eyes, thinking about the city, about the people he had met, about the deals he had made, the promises he had broken, and the money he had gained at a cost that could never be repaid. He wondered how long he could hide it, how long he could smile and nod while the truth gnawed at him from within. Nneka appeared behind him, silent, placing her hand lightly on his shoulder. She didn't say a word, yet the weight in that touch was enough to remind him that the time to speak was drawing near, and the moment he did, nothing would ever be the same again. Obiechina knew that soon, very soon, he would have to face the story that had followed him from the city, the story that was not just about wealth, but about fear, loss, and choices that could break the strongest hearts. Nneka would listen, she would weep, she would try to forgive, but nothing could undo the road he had traveled. And deep in his chest, where silence had lived so long, a quiet dread began to stir, telling him that the village, the mother, the boy he had once been, they were all about to meet the truth, and nothing would ever be simple again. The morning after, Obiechina woke to the sound of roosters breaking the stillness, their calls echoing across the village like tiny alarms reminding him that time would not wait. He stepped out barefoot, feeling the soil cold under his feet, and walked toward the fields beyond the village, the car left glimmering behind him in the sun. The air was thick with the scent of freshly turned earth, the faint smoke of distant cooking fires, and the distant murmur of voices already stirring in the compounds. Yet inside him, the storm he carried grew heavier with each breath, the weight of truths unsaid pressing like a fist against his chest. He remembered every step he had taken in the city, every corner he had turned where danger lurked like it had life, every hand that had extended toward him, smiling with hidden teeth, every decision he had made in desperation. Some days had been a blur of hunger, some nights of fear so deep he had wondered if he would wake again. And then there had been the day the car first appeared, a gift wrapped in the velvet of survival but tainted by shadows that would not leave him. Every night since, the memory of that deal, that choice, had haunted him, making him tremble even when the sun shone bright. Nneka stepped outside, calling softly, her voice carrying over the fields. She approached him slowly, hands folded in front, her eyes scanning his face as though trying to read what he was unwilling to speak. Mother's intuition is never wrong, and she could feel it in the way he moved, the way his shoulders drooped under invisible weight, the way he avoided her gaze. "My son," she said gently, "you can tell me anything. You know that, don't carry it alone." Obiechina shook his head, letting a soft sigh escape, one that felt like it had been trapped in him for years. He wanted to tell her, every part of it, the city, the hunger, the fear, the choices, but the words would not leave his mouth. He led her to the edge of the stream that cut through the village, the same one he had played by as a boy, the same one he had dreamed by when he was alone in Lagos. The water glinted like silver under the sun, and for a moment, it brought back fragments of his childhood, fragments of innocence he feared were lost forever. Nneka watched him, her hands clasped, waiting, her heart heavy with a mixture of love and anxiety. He dropped his gaze to the water, his fingers tracing the ripples, and she could see the tremor of memories he could not yet share. Later, villagers began to gather, slowly, as they often did when something unusual stirred in their midst. They approached cautiously, some curious, some envious, some pretending casualness while their eyes betrayed fascination. Among them was Namdi, a young man who had once grown up with Obiechina, and who now looked at him with a mixture of awe and suspicion. They greeted each other with hands clasped, but the conversation quickly turned to the car, the city, and the unknown life that Obiechina had lived. He responded politely but vaguely, nodding, smiling, and sometimes avoiding words altogether. Each reply, however careful, made Nneka's heart sink a little deeper. By midday, Obiechina had taken to wandering through the outskirts of the village, past fields of cassava and maize, past mud houses with smoke curling from their roofs, past children chasing chickens and laughing without care. He carried himself differently now, heavier, older, not just in body but in presence. He noticed how people looked at him, not only with curiosity but with a silent measure of his worth. Some whispered that he had been touched by luck, some that he had met a powerful person in Lagos, some that perhaps he had done things no one would speak of openly. Obiechina ignored all of it, yet inside, the weight of these assumptions added to the storm he carried. As evening approached, Nneka prepared food, setting it outside on a mat where they could eat in the cool air. She tried to keep the mood light, asking about the city, about the work he had done, about the friends he had made. Obiechina answered softly, almost mechanically, giving just enough detail to satisfy casual curiosity without revealing the darkness beneath. He ate slowly, each bite deliberate, as though the simple act of nourishment was a reminder that he was still human, still a son, still part of a world that had not yet demanded the truth of him. The night fell gently, the sky a deep indigo, dotted with stars that seemed indifferent to human worries. Obiechina sat on the veranda, gazing at the car under the moonlight, the city within it, the city behind it, and the cost of everything he had gained. He thought of the men who had smiled too wide, of the promises he had made under desperation, of the fear that had guided him more than ambition ever did. He knew that each story he carried was a weight, a shadow that would follow him home, and that very soon, the truth would demand its place in the open. Nneka approached him, silent as the night, sitting beside him on the wooden chair. She did not speak immediately, letting the quiet settle, letting the night breathe around them. Then she said softly, "You are home now, my son, and I am glad. But I feel something in you, something heavy." He looked at her, eyes reflecting the moonlight, and for the first time, the truth pressed against the walls of his silence. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words stuck, tangled in shame, fear, and love all at once. He turned his gaze back to the car, the symbol of his journey, the symbol of survival, the symbol of choices made under pressure that would never be fully forgiven. All through the night, he wrestled with himself, pacing slowly, touching the car, staring at the ground, listening to the distant sounds of the village. He imagined the day he would have to confess to Nneka, the day she would understand everything and yet perhaps never forgive fully. And as the stars slowly moved across the sky, he realized that his journey was not complete, that the village would soon demand more than his presence, that his mother's heart, fragile and pure, would soon confront the storm he had carried for too long. In the early hours before dawn, Obiechina finally sat down, exhausted, letting the night seep into his bones, letting the silence speak in ways words could not. Nneka, still near, watched him with a heart both heavy and tender, sensing that the story was far from over, sensing that the boy she had loved and prayed for had returned changed in ways she could not yet comprehend. And in that quiet, in that tension between love and fear, a realization settled between them. The car, the city, the wealth, it was only a beginning, a surface. Beneath it lay truths that could either shatter or bind them, truths that would demand courage, patience, and a love stronger than fear. The sun rose eventually, spilling light across the village, illuminating the car, the house, the fields, and the unspoken storm within Obiechina's chest. Villagers began to stir once more, some curious, some whispering, all unaware that the weight of a hidden story had already begun shaping the days ahead. Obiechina knew, deep down, that he could not keep walking in shadows forever, and that very soon, the truth, heavy and unyielding, would demand its place, and the fragile heart of his mother would confront a reality that could break or remake them both. And as the wind rustled gently through the leaves, as children laughed in the distance, as smoke rose from the kitchens, Obiechina sat silently, feeling the pulse of the village, feeling the pulse of home, feeling the pulse of the storm he had carried all the way back, knowing that nothing would ever be the same once the story finally emerged. Obiechina woke before the sun had fully climbed the sky, the village still wrapped in a gentle haze of early morning mist. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wet earth and cooking fires from distant compounds. He moved quietly, almost ritualistically, past the car that gleamed like a promise, and into the small garden behind the house, where the soil had been tilled for planting cassava and maize. His bare feet sank into the damp earth, grounding him in a world that was at once familiar and strange, a world that had changed while he was away, yet remained stubbornly rooted in the rhythms of daily life. Nneka appeared with a bowl of warm pap, her face tired but calm, her eyes carrying the quiet strength of a mother who had seen too many storms to panic at the first gust of wind. She set the bowl beside him, and for a long moment, they sat in silence, sharing a meal that felt heavier with unspoken words than it ever could with hunger. Obiechina stirred the pap slowly, not eating yet, as if tasting the weight of the village in its sweetness and warmth. The neighbors began to stir more noticeably as the day grew brighter. Voices floated over the fences, carrying greetings, questions, and the soft murmur of speculation. Children ran past, scattering chickens and laughing, oblivious to the undercurrents of tension that laced the village air. Obiechina noticed their energy, the careless joy, and for a moment, he allowed himself a memory of his own childhood, a brief escape into the days before he had carried the heavy mantle of survival in a city that had no mercy for the unprepared. As the sun rose higher, a group of villagers arrived, led by Nneka, the village's unofficial chronicler, a man whose eyes were sharp and whose curiosity never rested. He greeted Obiechina with an exaggerated warmth, his voice loud enough to carry across the compound, praising the young man's success, marveling at the car, the clothes, the way he carried himself. Obiechina nodded politely, offering smiles measured in careful degrees, but his mind remained elsewhere, circling the truths he could not yet utter. By midday, more visitors had arrived, each bringing gifts and words of admiration, each trying to peer behind the carefully constructed veil that Obiechina maintained. They spoke of the city, of business, of wealth, each word heavy with envy and hope. Obiechina responded minimally, careful to reveal nothing. His silence was a language of its own, one that drew both fascination and unease. Nneka observed quietly, noting the way his hands sometimes trembled when conversation veered too close to the reality he had lived, the city that had given him everything and demanded even more in return. Late in the afternoon, Obiechina decided to take a walk beyond the far fields, past the small stream, into the edges of the village where the grass grew taller and the shadows stretched longer. The air smelled of wild herbs and distant fire, carrying with it the faint cries of goats and the distant hum of life continuing on despite the heavy presence of wealth that now marked him. He walked slowly, eyes scanning the horizon, remembering the men who had smiled too wide in Lagos, the deals made under the harsh glare of neon, the nights spent wondering if he would see another dawn. Each memory pressed against him, a weight in his chest heavier than any physical burden he had ever carried. When he returned, the village seemed different. The car, parked under the mango tree, glimmered almost defiantly in the sunlight, a symbol of the divide between him and the past he could no longer reclaim. Nneka approached him as he rested on the veranda, her hands brushing gently against his arm. She asked softly, without accusation, only curiosity and care, "Are you truly happy, my son, with what you have achieved?" He did not answer immediately, staring at the horizon, his eyes reflecting both the sky above and the shadowed corridors of his memories. Happiness was a strange, foreign concept now, tied up with fear, with regret, with choices that could never be undone. As evening fell, painting the village in deep amber and bronze, Obiechina finally allowed himself to speak to Nneka, though still not the full truth. He told her of the long days he had spent seeking work, of nights spent hungry, of the kindness of strangers and the treachery of others, of the city that offered opportunity but demanded something in return that was often more than a man could bear. He omitted the darker parts, the deals that had clawed at his conscience, the moments that would make her weep if she knew. Yet even in partial confession, Nneka felt the weight of what lay unsaid, the tremor in his voice, the shadow that had followed him home like an unwelcome companion. Night arrived fully, the sky dark and still, punctuated by stars that shimmered coldly over the village. Obiechina walked to the car, hands brushing over its surface, each touch a silent acknowledgement of the price paid for survival. He remembered the city streets, the heat, the noise, the danger lurking in every corner, the choices made out of desperation. The car was more than a vehicle, it was a monument to the years of struggle, of compromises, of fear, and of triumph that had shaped him into the man now seated in the quiet of the village. Nneka joined him after a long while, her presence quiet but steady, her hand finding his shoulder, grounding him in a reality that was both comforting and terrifying. She did not ask for details, did not push for explanations, but simply sat beside him, sharing the weight of silence. In that quiet, they existed in a space that was at once intimate and unbearable, the mother knowing that her son carried more than he could ever speak, the son aware that the truth would one day emerge in full, and that the heart of the mother he loved would be the first to feel its sting. Later that night, as the village drifted into sleep, Obiechina remained awake, pacing slowly across the veranda, hands sometimes running across the car, sometimes pressed to his chest, as if trying to steady the storm within. He thought of the words he would have to speak, of the faces that would see him differently once the truth was revealed, of Nneka, whose heart had always been his anchor and who now would bear the brunt of the secrets he had carried. The city had taken much from him, but it had also given him survival, wealth, and a presence that could command attention. Yet the cost of all this was a burden he could no longer keep hidden without consequence. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, spilling soft gold across the village and glinting off the car like a herald of what was to come. Obiechina watched it, silent, the air heavy with anticipation, the village slowly awakening to another day that would not be ordinary, for soon the truth would surface, the choices of the city would meet the innocence of the village, and the heart of Nneka would confront a reality both shocking and heartbreaking. He knew that the coming days would demand courage, honesty, and the kind of love that could survive the weight of revelations too heavy for ordinary hearts. And as the wind whispered through the leaves, carrying scents of earth, fire, and distant life, Obiechina understood that the moment to reveal his story was inevitable, that the calm before the storm would end, and that everything he had returned to find, his mother, his village, his childhood home, would never be the same again once the truth was finally told. The quiet that once comforted him now pressed in, reminding him that the choices of survival carry shadows, and shadows, no matter how long avoided, eventually seek the light. The village woke slowly that morning, with the soft calls of roosters and the faint smell of smoke from cooking fires curling through the air. Obiechina sat on the veranda, staring at the black car parked under the mango tree, the polished surface catching the sunlight and scattering it like shards of glass. His chest felt tight, as if every moment he delayed speaking made the weight inside him heavier, the truth pressing against him, demanding release. Nneka emerged from the house carrying a small basket of food, her eyes immediately finding him, and in that quiet gaze, she communicated more than words ever could. "I am here, I am ready to hear, and I will bear what comes." He rose slowly, letting his bare feet brush against the warm earth, the sensation grounding him. The village was quiet but alive, neighbors moving about with the usual rhythm, children running past with laughter spilling into the morning, women sweeping the compounds, men returning from the fields, yet everything felt strangely suspended, as if the air itself waited for the story he could no longer avoid. Obiechina knew the time had come. He had rehearsed in his mind the words he would say, the confessions he would make, the way he would ask his mother to understand, yet none of it seemed enough. They sat under the shade of the mango tree, the morning light soft against their skin, and Nneka looked at him with patience that only mothers hold, her hand resting lightly on his. Obiechina drew in a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the earth and the weight of the eyes he imagined watching from a distance. He began slowly, his voice low, careful, trembling just enough to show the truth that had been chained inside for years. He spoke of Lagos, of hunger, of nights spent wondering if he would live until dawn, of people who had smiled with hidden intentions, of doors that had opened only when desperation made him bold enough to step through them. He told her about the first time the car had entered his life, the hands that had offered it, the promises he had made, the fear that had crawled into his bones each time a decision had to be taken. He confessed the mistakes, the corners cut, the small betrayals, and the compromises that had filled his pockets but drained his soul. He spoke of people he had hurt unknowingly, of opportunities seized out of desperation, and of moments when he had thought survival justified every choice. Nneka listened quietly, her eyes fixed on his, holding the storm within him, absorbing every word like it had been her own heartbeat all along. The hours passed slowly as he spoke, and the village continued with its rhythm around them, unaware of the weight being lifted under the mango tree. Birds chirped, goats bleated, and the soft wind carried distant laughter, yet none of it seemed to reach them. Obiechina paused frequently, his hands trembling as if the act of speaking itself required a toll of strength, and Nneka would squeeze his hand, grounding him, reminding him that he was not alone. She did not recoil at the confession, did not look away in fear, though her heart ached with every detail, each revelation a quiet cut to her soul. When he finally stopped, when the words had poured out like a river too long contained, the silence that followed was both heavy and liberating. Nneka remained still, letting the enormity of what she had heard settle into her chest. Her eyes shimmered, reflecting both pain and relief, for she understood now the truth behind the car, the wealth, and the shadows that had clung to her son. She could see the boy she had raised in the man before her, the man who had endured more than she had imagined, and the love she held for him did not waver even as sorrow pressed in. Obiechina waited for judgment, for anger, for disappointment, but Nneka simply reached out, drawing him into her embrace. She held him as she had when he was small, her fingers threading through his hair, her cheek pressed to his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. It was not the embrace of approval for wealth or success, but of recognition for the struggle, for the survival, for the courage it had taken to return home carrying both triumph and burden. Tears streamed down her face quietly, a mixture of grief for the hardships he had endured and relief that he had come home alive. The villagers, drawn by whispers of Obiechina's confession, began to approach cautiously, standing at the edges of the compound, curious and apprehensive. Obiechina stepped forward, the car behind him now secondary to the truth that hung in the air. He spoke to them openly, telling them what he had learned in the city, what he had endured, and how every choice had carried weight, some visible, some hidden. His words were honest and raw, painting a picture of a world beyond the village that demanded courage, sometimes at the cost of innocence. The villagers listened in silence, their admiration tempered by awe at the enormity of what he had survived. As the sun climbed higher, Obiechina began to smile, faintly at first, then more fully, as the tension that had pressed against his chest for years slowly released. Nneka joined him at his side, her hand in his, and together they faced the village, the car, the home, and the life that awaited. She did not chastise him, nor did she offer empty comfort. She simply stood with him, letting her presence speak what words could not. And slowly, the whispers of the village shifted from suspicion to understanding, the curiosity turning into respect for the boy who had returned not just with wealth, but with courage, resilience, and honesty. By evening, the village had gathered fully, some bringing food, others just standing to witness, to feel the presence of a story come full circle. Obiechina shared lessons he had learned, the dangers of easy wealth, the price of compromise, and the importance of integrity even when survival demanded otherwise. Nneka listened and nodded, proud of her son not for the car, nor the riches, but for the man who had faced shadows, endured them, and returned home with both humility and courage. Night fell finally, the sky deep and serene, the stars scattered like distant lanterns above. Obiechina walked to the car one last time that evening, placing his hand on the hood as if saying goodbye to the years of struggle it represented. Nneka joined him, her arm around his waist, and together they looked at the village sleeping peacefully below, knowing that the truth had been shared, that the storm had passed, and that the love between mother and son had not only survived but grown stronger through it all. In the quiet that followed, Obiechina realized that wealth could be taken, misused, or feared, but the bond with his mother, the village, and the memories of home would remain unshaken. He understood, finally, that returning was not about the car, or the city, or even the wealth. It was about confronting the past, carrying the truth, and finding that even after darkness, light could still guide him home. And as the night deepened, he and Nneka sat together, a single quiet presence in the village, hearts heavy with past sorrows but light with the knowledge that honesty, love, and courage had conquered what fear alone could not. The village would speak of Obiechina's return for years, not just for the car, not just for the wealth, but for the story of survival, the courage to face the shadows, and the love that endured even through the heaviest of storms. And in the hearts of mother and son, a quiet promise settled. No matter what the world demanded, no matter what secrets or fears came their way, home, love, and honesty would always guide them back, stronger than any obstacle, unshaken by any darkness, and full of hope that could not be stolen. That was the story of Obiechina, how wealth, choices, and secrets can change everything, even the bond between a mother and her son. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more gripping tales. And we'd love to hear from you. Tell us the country you're watching from and what your time says in the comments below.